Hello, guys. Welcome back to our review of this book. It's almost 2 a.m. It's 2 a.m. actually, and I am deep inside my psychology exam session, but I somehow felt the obscene need of continuing the review of this book. So, you, audience, would forgive me for this, how to say, compulsion that I have. So, in the last chapter, we were talking about the death of God, in which Zizek has talked about Hegel's version of God, which brings itself to self-relativity. Self-relativity. Sorry, guys, it's late also for me. And by the way, the hat, it's because my hair are dirty. Dirty as a greasy oily grill, greasy, oily, it's a repetition, greasy, oily grill in a summer barbecue. Um, so, yes, the self relativity concept of Hegel was being discussed in the last chapter. It was really nice, in my opinion, the conceptualization of God's self negation that eventually is brought back to life by the community as the concept of the Holy Spirit. It's really fascinating. Today's chapter is gonna be called by Zizek "Suicide as a Political Act," and already from this title, you can tell, guys, it's something really interesting. Into this chapter, he takes kind of some like spiky topics with some in my opinion controversial ideas on racial and on racial issues, on racial matters. So let's start our reading by by reading the title, "Suicide as a Political Act." So to orient ourselves in this mess, we should make a step beyond the ambiguity of negation of negation. So it's still continuing with the same leitmotif it started the evaluation of God in the previous in the previous section. The ambiguity of negation, and add self-negation at its most radical. Suicide. So here he's been tackling negation of negation as if in many different ways. Now he takes it in the ultimate way. Suicide. Can we imagine suicide as an emancipatory political act? Let us turn to more specific cases. In the last year, a suicidal proposal aroused a wide debate in South Africa. Derek Hook reports how, in March 2016, Delport, a young white academic, sparked outrage at a Johannesburg conference at the University of the Witwatersrand when he called on white people in South Africa to commit suicide as an ethical act. Here are Delport's own words. I'm just gonna cut. I have underlined the most important part of this quote. The only way then for white people to become part of Africa is to not exist as white people anymore. If the goal is to dismantle white supremacy, and white supremacy is white culture and vice versa, then the goal has to be to dismantle white culture and ultimately white people themselves. So this is a radical stance by the student, radical and provocative, but indeed meaningful in the sense that is going straight to the point. In order to free ourselves from the oppression and the biases and the stereotypes that are being constantly, these are the least impacting things, to be honest, that have been oppressing us throughout the centuries. We must get first rid of the cause that's creating those. How, more concretely, are we to imagine the symbolic suicide of the South African whites? Donald Moss proposed a simple but problematic, for me at least, solution. The racist whiteness is a parasitic formation which parasitizes on whites themselves. So why Zizek finds this stance, this political stance problematic? Because Zizek doesn't like hidden meanings. He often advocates for an ideology which has amongst many of its fetishes the disavowal one. So basically you are going to dismiss the causes. You're going to try to find an hidden meaning behind something which is obvious. And so Zizek is against this. Just like in the previous chapters he said, like, I am a bastard. When somebody is looking at you and telling you that you're a bastard, that he's a bastard, I'm sorry. And so basically you wonder, why is he telling me that he's a bastard? Is there any hidden meaning behind of it? So we tend to overanalyze, we tend to, complicate things when sometimes they're not just that complicated. Even though Zizek tends to be very, 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 very complicated, to be honest. So this is also a contradiction in his way of thinking. Anyways, Donald Moss version of this quote, interpreting this racist whiteness as a parasitic formation which parasitizes on whites themselves, is like saying that whiteness is a condition one first acquires and then one has as a malignant parasitic-like condition to which white people have a particular susceptibility. So the object to which Delport is referring into his radical quote, it's a way of being, whiteness, which eventually parasitizes whites and brings them into the behavior they are notoriously known for. So it's like a condition, it's a pathological condition. To get rid of the resistance, whites have to get rid of the parasitic whiteness, which is not part of their substantial nature, but just parasitizes on them, which means that they do not lose the substance of their being, they even regain it, obliterating its distortion. So Zizek comments on this by saying, I prefer this to easy way out Hooke's comment inspired by Lacanian theory. Delport's rhetorical and deliberately provocative suggestion is perhaps not as counterintuitive or crazy as it first sounds. Arguably, it is the gesture of giving up what one is that proves a necessary first step to becoming what one is not. So in order to allow yourself to change, you must be willing firstly to negate yourself. This is the transformative potential of anxiety that clinicians work so hard to facilitate, and that I think can also be discerned, however fleetingly, in the instances of white anxiety discussed above. The potentiality that a new and hitherto unthinkable form of identification is being unconsciously processed and negotiated. So here it's a powerful stance by Zizek. I'm sorry, just felt the need of cracking. It's a powerful stance by Zizek. It's really interesting in my opinion. But it's not over yet. I mean, we guess that It's not a pathological condition. Whites don't have to get rid of something that has been bonding inside of their nature for so many centuries. It's not just like that for Zizek. Zizek takes a step further beyond, and it gets even more provocative than Delport's initial quote. Because Delport was advocating for a white self-negation. As we will see in the further paragraph, Zizek will be advocating for black people's self-negation in order to surpass their political stance of oppression. Oh no, political stance of being oppressed. What I nonetheless find problematic in these lines is the optimistic turn, of course. It means a symbolic erasure of their identity, which already points towards a new form of identity. I find it much more productive to establish a link between this idea of whites' collective suicide and the idea of so-called Afro-pessimism. Afro-pessimism is basically the idea from which Afro-American oppression is the baseline over which other kinds of oppressions are built. So it's just like saying being like anti-Semitic by saying that you are anti-capitalist. Anti-capitalist goes before, in Zizek's point of view. Is the experience that grounds today's Afro-pessimism not a similar one? Is the insistence of Afro-pessimists that black subordination is much more radical than that of the other underprivileged groups not grounded in the act of assuming that one belongs to such a zone of non-being? So what if we turn Delport's suggestion, radical as it may appear, around and propose that it is the black in South Africa who should commit a collective symbolic suicide to shed their social symbolic identity, which is profoundly marked by a white domination and resistance to it, and which contains its own fantasies and even narcissistic investments of victimization? That's so crazy, in my opinion. I don't know what to think about this, to be honest. He is deliberately saying that white people, like Afro people, are crybabies, and that they are leaning too much towards the past. They are not allowing present to retroactively influence the past. On such regard, I remember a Morgan Freeman opinion on this about racism, and he bluntly said, just not talk about it, and that particularly sums it up. Morgan Freeman just said, how do you solve racism? Well, we just do not talk about it. We just do not allow that social symbolic order to get in between our conversation. Why should we even make a premise which is subtly underlying the differences that separates us and inevitably propelling them into the future? We simply do not talk about it. How does the Afro-American community gets rid of the shadow of oppression that is projected by the white community? By breaking the bond that they have inevitably with the white community, by stopping defining themselves in relation with the white community, and by making a positive step towards a new form of identification. So the more I'm talking about it, the more I feel convinced of it, but at the same time, in groups interaction, in social interactions, I do think that these relations are so intertwined within another, and that, of course, Zizek would disagree when I'm saying things are much more complex, but I don't know, this is a controversial stance. I get his point, but at the same time, probably also given the narrative that we've been fed nowadays on such behalf, I feel strange to embrace it, and I must think over it more. So blacks needs to perform the gesture of giving up what one is. Consequently, I see Afro-pessimism above all as something that announces the potentiality that a new and inherent unthinkable form of identification is being unconsciously processed and negotiated. To revolutionize a system is never equal to just eliminating one of its parts. In the same way that the disappearance of Jews as a disturbing element never restores social harmony. Was Malcolm X not following this insight when he adopted X as his family name? The point of choosing X was not to mobilize the blacks to fight for the return to some primordial African roots, but precisely to seize the opening provided by X. An unknown, a new, a lack of, in the Lacanian sense, identity engendered by the very process of slavery which made the African roots forever lost. This X, which deprives blacks of their particular tradition, so is not something necessarily related with their past. I'm sorry, I just lost myself. Okay. Offers a unique chance to redefine, reinvent themselves, to freely form a new identity much more universal than white people professed universality. To put it in Hooke's term, Malcolm X proposes for blacks themselves to bring to an end their deracination with a gesture of symbolic suicide, the passage through 0 point in order to free the space of a new identity. And he demonstrates, this is him like proving further why he thinks in such a way, bringing in the example of Malcolm X and its choice behind the X. X as a new representative of a of a like fresh social symbolic order. Yeah. One cannot but note the cruel irony of the fact that, although, as is well known, Malcolm X found this new identity in the universalism of Islam, he was taking a positive stance into this new symbolic order. He was trying to redefine Afro-Americans' identity without any relations with the white supremacy that has oppressed them. But in all probability, he was killed on the order of the organization called the Nation of Islam, an organization which used Islam to serve its limited ethnic identity. I don't know anything about these stories, guys, so if you know something better than me, I'm just reading it, I'm just taking it as something that is being written, but I don't really have deep insights whatsoever relating Malcolm X assassinations. Malcolm was killed because he blurred the clear line that separated ours from yours. He was killed to prevent the blacks from committing symbolic suicide that would open up the path not only their emancipation. And even today we continue to live in the shadow of this failed suicide which keeps the blacks in their subordinate position. The topic of failed suicide deserves special attention, as was pointed out by Alenka Zupancic, another great philosopher, follower of Zizek, which has made really interesting books relating ethics in the Kantian and Lacanian philosophy. It presents an exemplary case of the negation of negation as failure of negation itself. Is a hint in this direction not clearly discernible already in Freud's theory of dreams, symptoms, slips of the tongue, and other forms of the return of the repressed? Something repressed, negated, excluded from consciousness, return as a broken, distorted, ciphered message in which negation is negated, but not in a triumphant synthesis. It returns as a fragmentary compromise which is neither here nor there. What is he even fucking talking about? Bro, I didn't remember this chapter to be so complicated. I guess I must be going to bed, guys. Sorry for the poor quality of this video. I will delete it, or maybe I will leave it. Leave it a comment. This is obscene. This must be remained here, and you know, whatever the fuck you're doing, do it obscenely, and do it embracingly. Leave a like, comment, subscribe, and see you in the next one.